Okay everybody, Blackjack Enterprises, Sean Carlson. This is my next project for a customer who wants this fixed. I charged him $60 Canadian for it. This is a straight shaft, Homelite, 26 cubic centimeter, weed whacker. There's a sticker on there. We'll get to that sticker later. I told him that what I would be doing is a complete engine tear down and rebuild of this. The information about this is right there, and whoa, it looks like there's fuel in there still. It looks like it's red fuel, so yeah. Different type of mix, but that's fine. There does not seem to be any other noticeable wear on it or about it. No cracks, no deformations, and that fuel is not leaking. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, what we're gonna do on this one is a complete engine tear down and rebuild. Okay? And if you're wondering why I'm going to do an engine teardown and rebuild, and that's just for everybody else that wants to do their own servicing on this, what you can expect to see when you are taking it apart, what parts to take apart, how they're situated, and stuff like that. And just like all the other components, this here head will come off too. This will come off, this will come off, this has come off. The shaft that is inside this will come out, and we will grease that. Okay, so this is a bump head dual line trimmer, and we will download the manual for this as well. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's get started. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna make ourselves a drink. That's the first thing that you're gonna do. I have a rum and coke right there. We're also gonna need a screwdriver, which is a 220 star head, and then once we can do that, we can remove this. This cover comes off, the carburetor comes out, and then this can be disconnected from the shaft. Okay, so first things first, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 screws to come out. Okay, so I'm gonna remove those. Once that is set aside, this is what we have. All right, now this cover comes off by a little tab right there on the top and on the bottom. That tab and that tab. Okay, and then there's nothing on the inside here. Okay, put that aside. Then we're going to take out the fuel filter, or the air filter. We'll put that aside. We'll cover that. And then we have another 2 screws right there and right there. These 2 screws hold this into place, and they hold the carburetor in place, and the little gizmo into there too, into place. Okay, so these screws are directly attached to somewhere into this unit here. Okay, so it looks to me, when I look at these screws very carefully, somebody had this apart before. A little bit of strength that I need to get these undone, so I gotta put my phone down. Okay, these are the screws that I was talking about that came out of these 2 holes, right? So this here, look at this, it's got some kind of liquidy crud on there, so we can wipe that up. We'll put that aside. Okay, my music, I'm gonna turn it on for a minute. Now that means the carburetor will be loose, so what we're going to do is we're going to loose it, and we're going to take this throttle cable off. It will still be attached by these fuel lines. Okay, so we're going to wriggle it off just like that. There is a gasket which is right there, which separates the metal from this to this, which creates a seal. Okay, those holes that you see, that hole in the top there, needs to line up with this here, which goes into that bottom one. Okay, so make sure that if this gasket rips, you need to replace it. So taking the throttle cable off with one hand, with the phone in the other, it's virtually impossible. There we go. Now, if there is no fuel in this, that's good. Okay, we are going to talk about the carburetor later, but I'm not going to mess around with this now. What we do now is we disconnect these two lines so that way we can take the carburetor out. And because I can't do anything with two hands at once, I'm going to put my phone down. And I'm going to have a drink. Okay, so once you get the carburetor out, put it into a container because there's a little bit of fuel that are left in there and it could leak out and cause a bad smell or stain. Now, so we're going to look at this. There might be just a little bit of pressure in the gas tank as a result of hitting the primer button. See, when you hit the primer button, it creates pressure in the gas tank, which may not be relieved by this little valve right here, one-way valve, okay? This is a pressure relief valve in the gas tank. If you keep pressing that primer button, press, it creates pressure into here, which should be released by this. If that's not the case, and you take the carburetor out, you will notice that you will, whichever one of these tubes you take out, it will spurt gas. And remember, I was talking to you that there's fuel left in here. Okay, so dump the fuel out before you take the carburetor out. But in my case, I didn't do that, and I'm letting you know now. There could be a burst of energy coming from one of these tubes when you take it out if you don't decrease the pressure or remove the fuel. Okay, so once you get the carburetor out, you're going to take your screwdriver and you're going to hit this screw, the one in the bottom there, the one that is right here, and there's one underneath. And what that's going to do is that's going to separate the engine block from this here in particular. Okay? And then what we will have is an entire completely engine which is separated by this. And don't forget to have a drink. Okay, so here's the engine completely right out. This is how you pinch off the fuel lines so that way they don't leak. But what I went and did was I went and tipped it up like this. I went and undid that cap and I took out the relief of those those lines so that way it's not going to spill out. So the handle here, this configuration I've messed with it before, and I remember this does not come out easily, so I snipped the line and the handle so that way this is now loose. So this kind of what it is that you have to do to disconnect the engine from the housing. These here, you gotta take those apart too and disconnect the on and off switch. There is orientation, I'll show you later how to identify which of these goes, but it's pretty self-explanatory because one is wider than the other. Okay, that's small and that's just a little bit bigger. So now that we got this engine out, we're going to look at it. Okay. Oh, it's just leaking a little bit, but that's why we have a rag. What we're going to do now is we're going to take out the muffler and the fuel tank off. We're going to take out the spark plug. We're going to take off this here. And we're going to analyze the inside of the cylinder. To take out the fuel tank, you have 1, 2, 3 screws, bolts, holding it in. Okay, so you might need a T25 to take those out. But just taking those out, and this will come out. Remember to have a drink. Once you got that fuel tank out, we're going to look at it. Okay, so, oh, look at that sticker. Inspected by. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, just so you all know, when something is inspected, it does not necessarily mean that it was worked on. What we are doing right now at this very second is we're inspecting this gas tank. Okay? Inspecting means you're looking at it, does not necessarily mean that you're working on it. But this takes 50 to 1 gas according to that sticker. Okay? So, one of these is a fuel filter and the other is a return. I do not know which one. We're not going to know that until we look inside this by taking this off. We're not going to worry about that right now. We're going to have a drink, we're going to have a sip, and then we're going to take this off. Once again, this is a T25. 2 bolts, take this off, and those are the only 2 that I can see so far that is holding that in. So this is going to come off next. These are the 2 bolts that were attached to the block that we're holding in. the muffler. Now, this here is an entire gasket which separates the muffler from the housing, and this surface right here needs to be crack-free, everything, okay? So this here is just the cover for this, so you can protect yourself so you don't get burned. And this here is the actual muffler itself. You could flush this out with air if you want. You could clean that part here. That part there, you could blow this out or put some liquid in there, swish it around, drain it out just to get it nice and clean. But it comes out. So that's that. I'm gonna have a drink before I look at the rest of this. Okay, now we're at the bare components of the engine. This here's the spark plug, so let's look at the spark plug. These are the numbers that were on it. We're gonna look at the tip. There's nothing wrong with the tip. In fact, this looks pretty much like a brand new spark plug. There's nothing wrong with this spark plug at all. We're just gonna dry it out and clean it out with maybe a small whisk toothbrush. But aside from that, there's no damage to it. Okay, so when it comes to the cylinder, the piston and the cylinder, so this is the muffler side, this is the spark plug hole, and this is the carburetor side. Get yourself a good sunlight position like I have, and turn the flywheel, and you can get a good, somewhat good idea when you look in there at the piston. I don't know if you can see it too well on my end, but I'm turning it. Oh, there we go. Let's see if we can get more sunlight onto that. If you look at that piston, you can see that it's pretty good on the carburetor side. So as I'm spinning the muffler, or as I'm spinning the flywheel, you can see that there's hardly any issues with the piston. Okay, so that's pretty good condition. The piston is pretty good condition. Now we're going to look at the muffler side. Okay, muffler side. Tipping it down. There we go. Okay. Ooh. Just a little bit of lines on the piston on the muffler side. So that's almost concerning. And I can tell from this angle the top of the piston, there's nothing wrong with the top of the piston because I can see right into there. I can also look into the top here too. And there's no obvious deformations on top of the piston. So now that we got that looked at, what we're going to do now is we're going to take off this cover. This cover is direct access to that piston and the workings. So let's see here, T20. I'm going to take a T20 and take this off. Since you can see that there's a gasket, be careful when you take this off because that gasket is the only thing that is separating this metal from this part of the metal. Okay, a gasket will always separate two metal sides, so don't just rip this off because you might rip the gasket and you might need to remake it. Okay, so I'm going to do that carefully. And there we have it. So this cover, as you can tell, there's just a little bit of gasket right there which came off, which I told you to be very careful because when you look at the gasket all around here, you can tell that it's very delicate. Try to trace this again and try to recreate that. A lot of people will try to cheat it and will put gunk. They'll just slather a whole bunch of gunk on here instead of having a gasket because they actually ripped it all to shit, and that'll be your first indication that this has been worked on before. Those bolts right there were very hard to take out. As you can tell, there's white shit on them. That white shit that's on this is a type of thread locker. And this part right here is where all the fuel and the oil combine just to lubricate this up. So when you put gas in here, this is going up and down. This part is being lubricated, okay? So now I'm just going to go and put this straight up. Don't forget to have a drink. Okay, so aside from this not being taken off, which I didn't do, we now have a pretty good idea of the condition of the engine. Everything that I have shown you is actually in pretty good condition. This works pretty well. There's no, I'm actually looking for loose components, rust components, salt, corrosion, any debris that was inside this part here, which could cause clanking or anything like that, which would have caused that lines on the muffler side of the piston could be collecting into here, and it does not look like that is the case. So this here is a pretty good engine. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take silver rags, some cleaning products, whatever, and I'm just going to clean every part slowly, bit by bit, and we're going to go through a process on how to clean this. Okay, we're going to look at this. Not to mention, we're going to take the carburetor apart too and look at that. But we're going to have a drink. Okay, I got this all cleaned up. As you can see, it is the gas tank. I had to go make a real quick run to the Vancouver Auto Parts just to get this, just to make it look this nice and clean. So we want to know which of these connects to the fuel filter. So we got to look inside the gas tank, and it looks to me like it's this line right here, connects to the fuel filter. So that means gas is going from the gas tank into here, into the carburetor, and when you're pressing the primer bulb, the fuel is being circulated back into this one here, goes back into the fuel tank. And if I was to look really closely, I can see that the return line is just a little bit too far. It only needs to stick in about maybe 1 inch from the top right in there. So somebody has worked on this before, and they went and stuck that in there too long. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna take this out, and we're gonna inspect the line for rigidity, any cracks, and we're gonna put some fluid in there to make sure that there's no cracks or anything inside the line, and that there is no leakage coming from out of here. Okay, so just so everybody knows, these are 2 different size holes. On some models, those are 2 different size holes. One's 8mm and one's 10. I think the 10 goes into the carburetor, attaches to the fuel filter, and the 8mm is the return. Okay, you really got to be careful of that, because when you look even at the carburetor, this one here in particular, there could be 2 size ends right here. One could be smaller than the other one. Okay, so you got to be careful of that. Watch that. Now, as for the fuel cap, this part of the fuel cap is a one-way valve. And I got a 1/4 inch hose hooked up to that, and I've got that hooked up to a needle sucker tube. So what I'm able to do is I'm able to suck the air out, which means air is going into here and out here the tube. What I will not be able to do was push this back in. Okay, so I'm pushing this out. So you can hear that, right? Good. Now I'm going to put this back in. And because that's a one-way valve, I'm pushing air in. It will not be able to go in. I should be having trouble with this. It's compressing. I am really freaking pushing that in there, and it's not working. I am stuck. See that? How it's rebounding back? I'm compressing the air. It's not leaving the tube right there, and it's coming out on its own. So that is how you know that this is a one-way valve. That is also how you know that there's nothing wrong with this cap. Okay, it lets the air in, so that, okay, take that off. I was going to show you, but yeah, that's how that works. Okay, some have 3 holes here, and one of the holes is an actual air vent, so that way this doesn't explode if you leave it on sunlight like it is right there. Okay, so 2 lines. One goes to the fuel filter, one is the return. If there's a 3rd line, that's a relief valve. Some relief valves are directly right onto the cap, like this one here. Okay, so if you want to clean inside the fuel tank, you could, use any method that you want. Soap, water, gas. What I've used is like tiny screws and BBs from pellet guns, and put them in there, and then shook it around. And that dislodged all the grease and the components that were stuck onto the gas tank. This one looks pretty clean on the inside there, so we're not going to do any more on this. And I have already tested that this does not leak at all whatsoever when we were looking at it. There's no visible cracks or anything in there, okay? So that's it for the fuel tank. Now we're going to look at the carburetor. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to strip this carburetor apart. Before we do, we're going to look at it, okay? And it's windy out. there is original markings of this carburetor that is on here. And this one here is right there. The markings are right there. As you can see, they're kind of stamped on there. They're embedded. And you can see that there's a initial in there, HA. Oh, and there's your high-low settings. So this screw right here on this side is the high side, here's the low side. We will be taking those screws out, and we got to measure how far that they are in first before we do that. The primer bulb is going to come off. This part here is going to come off too, and we have a major marking right there. You see that? That there is a marking of this carburetor, which tells you the manufacturer, okay? And I should be able to look that up, so I should be able to get the paperwork about this carburetor. And what we're going to do is just going to take this apart now, all of it, okay? Okay, so this is the carburetor in pieces. This is the main body, which we have got stripped down. It looks clean because that's because I use this. You're going to need a cleaner with a little red straw in it to get into all these tiny little holes to make sure that the fluid is flowing through them, okay? So, now, let's talk about these two. One's a high jet and one's a low jet. The high jet is always the screw that is furthest away from the piston. Okay, so on this side is the cylinder, this side is the carburetor. So when we take these out, we need to find a screwdriver in particular, and I just happen to have a whole bunch right there. See that? Okay, so when we take these out, we gotta push them in first. So instead of taking them out, we're going to put it in, and we're going to count the revolutions as how many times it takes for us to screw it in before it stops. We count that, and then we write it down, and then we can take it out. And we do the same thing with this one. We make sure that we do not confuse these two because they could be totally two completely different lengths, okay? And the tip of the noses, the nozzles, could be different sizes as well. So separate this one, label it H, separate this one and label it L, okay? So we're gonna screw this one in. We're gonna count how many revolutions it takes for it to be put in, and then we're gonna take it out. And we're gonna do the same thing with this one here, okay? And that's how you handle these jets. Now, there's tiny holes that these jets go through. So that high jet has something to do with this valve in there, which also has to do with that hole. Which means that it goes, you can see, if you were to spray it, you would see it going through a hole on the inside there. Right where that center valve is. The low jet has to do with this parts of the components, which has that long slot there, which can be taken out and apart, and the holes for that will be on this side of the engine, which you could see little tiny holes, which I can barely see them, but there's little tiny holes that have to do with these two jets. So what happens is when the air is coming into the carburetor, gas is circulating, and when you're pressing that primer button, and then you hit the throttle, like vroom, vroom, vroom. Okay, so the gas is going in through there, and it has to do these jets which allow the fuel to flow through. So when it's idling because of the low jet is letting the fuel through on this side of that valve. The high jet means that it's letting fuel through on the inside of this carburetor, on the other side of this valve. Okay? And hold on. Now, when it comes to which type of screwdriver that you're going to need to get into there, if you look at it carefully, if you look at the screws carefully, you can tell that there's a slot on one side. This screwdriver right here has that. This one is called a Pac-Man. Okay? And these are four-sided, these are squares, so that way when you taking the screws out, you can count the turns. So this is 0 turn, so a quarter, half, 3/4, 1. A quarter, half, 3/4, 2. Okay, that's how you count the turns when you're putting those in and you're adjusting them, okay? So that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, now that we got those two jets out of here, I've got them written down right there and their position. and they're out of there. So now I can take a little straw and start blowing the holes in, but I want everybody to pay attention to this because this is important. This is the low, this is the high. As you can tell very much when you put them side by side, they look different. Okay, the high side is lower and shorter than, or the high side is lower than the low side, and the low side is longer than the high side, if that makes sense. But be very careful not to get these two confused when you put them back in, otherwise the carburetor is not going to adjust properly when it comes to doing that. That is very freaking important. Okay, so we got the carburetor all put back together. Everything's cleaned out, everything is back as the way it should. Remember, this one here is the return, this one here is the intake, which is connected to the fuel valve. So what we're going to do is we're going to suck up some fuel, and if this is working correctly, you should see the fuel being sucked up into by the tube by the carburetor. Okay, so I'm going to press it. You're going to watch the fuel come up. Here we go. Pressing. Okay, so we got our new lines in with the old air filter. I used an old air filter because all I had to do was just blow it out with a cleaner, and it's good. So this works, and these two holes here, let me show you something. These two holes here are the same size. I checked them. So what you're going to need is a line that's just a little bit bigger in diameter, so that way it squeezes in the holes, so that way it creates pressure on the housing of this gas tank. Okay, so once you have this and your return, which about 1 inch away from here, then you need to label it. Put this filter and then return. So FR. Now I already know which one's which because I've done this like literally hundreds of times before. So this now is ready to go into the gas tank. Okay, just like that. And now we can put the cap on. The cap is clean. Now, because of the fact that these two holes are the same, these two ends are also the same. Sometimes they are bigger than the other, and the bigger nib goes onto the bigger hole. And that's how you figure that out to decide which one goes where. And if you're looking at this carburetor, this is the return, this is the intake. Outtake, intake. Fuel goes in, fuel comes out when you press the primer bulb. Okay? And that's that. Now, aside from the engine, which all we got to do now is just put it together, what we're going to do is we're going to take apart the head. There's gears in this head here. First thing comes off is the cutter head. We'll look at that. Then this part comes off. This part is probably attached to it. I don't think so, but it looks of it. No. But when we're gonna do take out the shaft, and it's attached to this, which is the not the choke. It's attached to what's this called? I can't. But when the thing spins really fast, it engages this. The clutch. Yes. So the line is attached to the clutch, as you can see. So we're gonna pull that out with the clutch. We're gonna undo the head first. So that's how we take out the shaft that's spinning in here. That's attached to this. Okay. So let me put my phone down so I can get a better look at this. Oh no. Okay, so it comes when we go take off the end here. Those little instructions right there says off, and you have to turn it this way. Okay, righty loosey, and then this will slide right off. Okay, then we have the shaft that we got to take out and apart. So that cross head, those two bolts will undo this head. We're gonna do that right now. So once you've got it this far, you need a 5/8 wrench to hold that and a crescent to pull this out. And like I said, this is backwards. So once you got that out, this one just slips right off. Okay. Then what you're gonna need, as you can tell on the inside, you're gonna need some of these type of pliers. Okay. Those go right in there and remove that ring. I gotta put my phone down to do that. So once you got that out, this actually just twists off. You can just pull that out. You're gonna pull it really hard when you're twisting it out. Okay, so once you get it down to this far, that ring is out. You know what? I can't really take this apart anymore, and I don't want to damage it. A lot of you would say that I would use a slide hammer by putting it on the threads and then banging it out. But then if I had to bang it out, that means I would have to bang it back into, which means a lot more stress on the threads just to do that. But if I look inside there, if I was to turn this, it turns freely. There's no looseness into it at all. And on this side here, I'm assuming that that is a grease hole. So you take a grease tip, you squeeze the oil into there, and that'll grease that up. So I'm gonna say that's as far as that we can go with that. And now what I can do is I can pull this out all the way. Okay, and then let me do that with my phone down. Okay, so apparently this can only come out on this side. So you gotta undo this, take this out so that way this can slide off. Alright? And then this will come out entirely. Be mindful of this spring right here. There's a spring right there. Be careful of that. Put that someplace safe. Okay, now this can come out. And I'm shocked because it's extremely short right now. So this is what it looks like on one end. I thought it was broken, but no. If there's a square on that end, that means that tells me that is half. And what that also tells me is there is a brake right here, which you can put another attachment on. That's what I was not seeing. So you gotta take this off and to take the rest of that line off. Darn it. Okay, so that part there is taken off. This part here is not. This is the part that was attached to the head. This is not coming out any which way you look at it. This is in there permanently. Okay, so we just gotta grease it as it is. Right there. And right there. If you look in there, there's a square receptacle to accept the other end. But this part here, that's that. So what we're going to do is we're going to grease this one and then put it all back together. Okay, so this is now fully greased and taken care of. Everything's put back together. And everything was greased with super heavy duty grease by Motormaster from Canadian Tire. Okay, so now that we got that taken care of, what we can do now is we can now analyze the cutter head. Sean Carlson, Blackjack 98 Enterprises. Does it matter which way you spool the line on your weed whacker? The answer is yes. According to the manufacturers, it does yes. And we're going to look at that right now. Okay, so now we're at the part where we're going to put the engine back together. What I want to show everybody is how exactly the carburetor components go on together when they're going in the engine. I gotta turn this off for a little bit. Okay, so let's put the engine like this. Okay, carburetor side, muffler side, spark plug, carburetor side. Okay, we're gonna lay this down. So look at the carburetor side. You see that hole? There's a hole at the bottom there, and there's a little hole at the top there for the gasket, but that hole is not going anywhere, it's blocked. This hole lets the air into, or exhales from the piston. Air goes to and from that little hole. So this part here goes on, just like that. Okay, now this part here goes into it. It goes right in just like that. Okay, now you're gonna have problems with this in particular because you're not gonna know if it's on right. So you see that U shape on this side of the circle? It's supposed to be on that side of the circle. You can put it on wrong and you're gonna fight with it. I'm gonna show you why you're fighting with it. Okay, so this is the right way. You see how it fits into there nicely? Now let's put it in the wrong way. This is turned and now flipped. Okay, now we're going to put it in. You might think that it doesn't make a difference, whatever. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But look at how it's getting stuck right there where my thumb is. It's being held up. Let's look at it this way. You see that? Even if I was to wiggle this my best and put it in there, you cannot force it in there. And that's because of that hole right there at the top. And you might think, oh, there's a hole right there at the top, it should just go in. No. This is going to hold up your screw, those screws right there, when you're going to put it in. So, it needs to be flush. So, take this out, flip it around, and put it the right way. Now it sits nice and flush, just like that, okay? And then, once that goes onto there, then your carburetor, just like this, goes onto that right there. Okay, now, as I was showing you with the holes, you see that hole on the bottom? Okay, there's it's coming from the top right there. And when you look at the carburetor, there's a hole at the top that comes from inside the carburetor. Okay, so that air hole goes through into there in the channel, goes down into the bottom, and out the other side. And it goes into that hole right there. Okay, so let's look at this. That hole in the top, which is right there, goes through that channel and into that hole in the bottom. Okay, just so everybody knows, this is no joke. You're the one that's going to fight with this. So, then the air filter. A lot of people are going to think, oh, if you put it on this way, it's going to work. The answer is no, because you see those holes right there? Those got to match up with these ones, and if I was to put them on there, it's going to hit the throttle thing, so it's got to go in this way. Okay? Just like that. There's no holes on this side of the air filter side because the air comes in through these 4 big holes right there in the middle. The air comes in and goes through into there, through the carburetor. There's no other holes that needs to be on this face. That is not a hole. That is not a hole. Okay? So this goes onto there just like that. The air filter goes into there just like that. And then the cover goes onto there comfortably just like that. Okay? And this has to fit into here. So let me put this together for you so you all have an idea of what it looks like. But that's exactly how it is that you do it, ladies and gentlemen, in that order. Okay? I just wanted to make a mention that when you are putting in anything delicate like a gas tank on, and you have bolts that are going from the bolt to the plastic to the housing, you could break this by over tightening any of these that are attached to the gas tank. Like this one right here is most important. Do not over tighten them. Do not over tighten them. You can use gunk in the threads to prevent it from rattling loose, but do not over tighten these when they're attached to anything plastic. You could break or crack the plastic, which could cause a leak, especially in this gas tank. Okay, so this is the part where everybody's going to fight with. Putting this part into this engine. So there's several things that we got to take. Okay, I'm out of rum. It's morning. It's like before lunch, so I'm going to have a coffee. Okay, on this engine, we're going to look at the bottom of it. This here is all loose, right? Spins, 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 woo, spins. Okay, there is a thing on here which you need to pay attention to, and that is this part here. Do you see that? That hole, that screw hole, lines up with the bottom of this. and it needs to line up with that there. Okay, so this is what you do. You put this directly on the bottom, so that way when you stand it up and you're looking at it, that flat spot there, that little part, will line up with that. Okay, now a lot of you are thinking, how do I get the freaking rewind cord? Okay, so this is what you do. What you're going to do is you're going to pull this out, all the way out. You're going to pull it all the way out, just like this, without moving that part. And you're going to feed this line in through that hole. Okay, you're going to do that first. Because I can't do it with two hands at once, that's exactly what it is that I'm going to do. I'm going to put this through the hole, and without moving that housing part there, keeping that flat space in line, I'm going to put this entire unit and snap it back into place. And then I'm going to put those electrodes in for the magneto. Okay, everybody, I got it. It actually does snap into place like I imagined. But this part here, it looks like it's loose, but it's ready to spring out on me. So there's 8 screws here. They are different. Okay, so this is for the plastic housing, which go into this part. This is for the metal housing, which attach to the engine, which are right here. Okay, so let's look at these very carefully, just so you know that they are different. Okay, so the coarse screws fasten this to the inside of the rewind. These actual bolts fasten the plastic housing to the engine. Okay, so I'm going to put the handle on here. I'm going to connect the magneto for the stop switch, and then we're going to have a look at it. Alright, so when it comes to putting the carburetor back on, you need to make sure that all the joints where this was held together, there's a joint right there, there, and there. So 1, 2, 3 places that those 2 screws are joining everything. You need to make sure that when you are tightening these up, that it's tight here, tight right there, and tight right here. If there is any air that gets into the cylinder from this area right here, then that means you gotta take it apart and put it together carefully, or there's a gasket missing. You need the gaskets between the metal surface. Okay, so between the air filter housing and the carburetor, there's a gasket. Between the carburetor and this part here, there's a gasket. Between this part here and the cylinder, there's a gasket. You see this part here that's kind of looks like it's kind of loose? Yeah, you know what, I looked at it and it'll be loose. But see, there's a screw hole here that the muffler housing attaches to it. That screw hole holds that into place. So, next thing I want to talk about is these lines here. As you can tell, they are a bit long. So, because this one here is the fuel line, we can hook that up right to the fuel outlet, which is right there. And once we get that in, all the way up there, so it's stuffed up right up to up there, we can reach in with the fuel line by unscrewing this, grabbing the fuel flow and pulling it out and straightening it out so there's no curve there. Because this one here is the return and we've already got it down a set distance in there, we can actually cut this loose and then put it into there. So I'm going to cut it right there about the edge of my fingertips, and that'll be good. Okay, so I'm going to work on these 2 lines, and then I'm going to put the muffler housing on, and then put the air filter back on with the cover, and then I'm going to put the fuel into here 50-to-1, and we're going to do a video on how exactly to mix fuel for this in particular. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do right now. So once everything is all put back together, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a pressure check. I'm going to give this about, let's say, 6 pulls. Okay, 6 pulls, and we're going to check the pressure. Right now it's at 0. So let me set my phone up. Whew, look at that, ladies and gentlemen. That's, so it's upside down. That's pretty good compression right there. That's just a little over 110. That is awesome. Okay, now we're going to put the fuel in and then take it to a place and then we're going to start it up. Okay, so when it comes to mixing the gas for this weed whacker, you cannot help but notice all around the weed whacker it says 50-1. So, according to the manufacturer's suggested recommendations, you need to use a still oil. So still two-stroke oil needs to be high quality and it needs to be for air-cooled engines. The particular oil that they recommend is still HB Ultra 2-cycle engine oil. That's for the oil that is according to the manufacturer's recommendations. When it comes to the gas, this is what we're looking at. This right here. In your vehicle, 97, 87 for your vehicle. This weed whacker takes 89. Okay, and that says that in the recommended manufacturer's instructions. Now we're going to mix the gas into this. We're going to put 250 milliliters into there and put some oil into there. We got to figure out how much oil is 250 milliliters. So this is what we're going to do. Math. 50 to 1. 50 milliliters of gas to 1 milliliter of oil. And we're going to convert that to 250 milliliters of gas. And we want to know how much of this oil that we need to put in. Okay, so multiply these two together. So you get 250 milliliters of gas equals, then you multiply these two together, 50x milliliters of oil. Okay, so here we go. Or not oil. So to make it easier for us, let's go like this. 250 divided by 50 equals x. 5 equals x. So 5 milliliters of oil is how much we need to put into here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to unscrew this cap. I'm going to use this to suck out 5 milliliters of oil from this, and I'm going to put it into this here. I will not be using 87 octane like we use in our vehicles. I will now have to go to a gas station and get 89. Once I have that into there, then we can put this into our weed whacker. And then we can go and start our weed whacker at a undisclosed location so we can test it out and adjust the carburetor. Okay, so when it comes to adjusting the carburetor, you're going to need this tool here in particular. It says Pac-Man because on the very end of it, there's like a small nib. And you can see it right there. Okay? That fits onto the end of the carburetor, which is accessible right there. Okay? So, we're going to talk a little bit about how to adjust the carburetor by hitting those jets. Alright? So, once we got the fuel in, we're about to test it out. We're going to go here. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, so this is our high jet. This is our low jet. The low jet is closest to the cylinder. The high jet is closest to the air filter. When you are turning it, this screwdriver itself is square. See that? How it's square? So when you are using your screwdriver, you're going to go, you're going to find out which direction you want to go for, if it's depending on the sound of the engine. So by turning it once this way, this surface is now up. You're going, let me use a pen. If you're turning it this way, that means you're pushing it in. Okay, pushing in by going this way. Okay, you're pushing the needle towards the carburetor. So by turning it, this surface goes up there and you're counting 1/4, half, 3/4, 1. Now the emblem which is on here. Sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can mark it on there, sometimes you can't. So make sure that you memorize which flat surface that this is. And we're going to turn the high jets really loud. We're going to like be full throttle, like that choke is off. And then we're going to adjust this. We're going to push it in or pull it out before the revolutions a minute starts to decrease. If we push it in too much, it'll sound like it's going to die. So we pull it out, and we pull it out just enough that the engine sounds like it's going to die. So if we push it in, we're pushing it into a point here where it sounds like it's going to die. Then we go this way, and we take it out. We're pulling it out, we're screwing it this way out. And then we're pushing it to the point that it sounds like it's going to die. And then we figure out which of those positions that are surfaces on that we can see. And we go directly right in the middle. And at this point right here, that's the sweet spot that your engine should be. It should be exactly half. Not just a little bit more to the point that it dies, or a little bit less. But just right at this point. So you can measure it from here to here using these flat surfaces, okay? Now, when you let go of the throttle, like you're just letting go, letting it idle, that is when you hit your low jet. Now you got to do the exact same thing right there. In order for your weed whacker to idle, you need to let go of the throttle and the engine has to run on its own. This controls the amount of gas that is going into the carburetor in order for the carburetor to run on its own when you are not pulling on the throttle. So once again, you go push it in or pull it out, and you find that sweet spot where it starts to die and it starts to pick up. Okay, it starts to die, starts to pick up, starts to die. And you go right in the middle with this one here. This you do first, this you do second. First you adjust the high, then you adjust the low on a weed whacker only. On a weed whacker only do you do this. Okay, so I'm going to be using this to adjust this at a disclosed location, and I will be doing it exactly like that. Okay everybody, there is gasoline in this and the fuel lines are full. Press the primer bulb. I wanted to take the time to let everybody know that once you got everything all done, the gas is in here. Look for leaks anywhere. Any dripping, any seeping, any whatever. Right now, when I lift this up, I don't see any wet spots. And everything is dry. Everything's been completely freaking dry. And when you look at the primer bulb, no, you know what? That's half full. I had a problem with that primer bulb before. It's not really supposed to look like that when you're pushing it down. It's supposed to be a solid flow. But there is gas going through. I might have problems starting this up. But you see how the gas tank is sitting directly right on the surface here? This is the #1 cause for broken gas tanks. Because when people put it down, they're slamming the gas tank right onto the ground. And if you left this entire thing out to the sunlight, this part here in the sunlight, the plastic actually gets brittle. And it breaks. And it costs money to fix these. A lot of them if you know how to order them. Luckily, this one here is not leaking at all whatsoever. But if you were going to put this down, you would need to put this down on something soft, like have a rag or something with you. Gosh, you know what? They should actually make some type of fence that you can attach to these holes here, and then like a wire fence to protect that gas tank from people putting it down. You know what? If I look at the bottom of it, there's a whole bunch of scratches and shit on from people actually doing that. You can see that. So, yeah. Now we're gonna go take it and test it out.